Welcome to the All Things Wildfire podcast, where we delve into the latest trends and hot topics in protecting properties against wildfire. So sit back, relax, and join us as we arm you against disaster.
So welcome everyone to another episode of All Things Wildfire. And in today's episode, I have a guest that not only has insurance experience, but wildfire boots on the ground experience. And some of you already know him because he's a well-known fixture in the insurance world and wildfire world. When we go to these conventions, this guy's name keeps coming up. And I had the pleasure of meeting him years ago, and now a pleasure to have you on the podcast, Mr. Mike Thayer. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you, LP. I appreciate the time.
No, you got it. Now, Michael, it says here, I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile, you have the NFPA Certified Wildfire Mitigation Specialist certification. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I think right now that exam I think is being rewritten and probably even harder than it is now. So congrats for getting it, number one. But that's definitely something that, you know, anyone that is living in this world like we live really can benefit from that type of a certification. So I think it's a big important piece for all of us to really understand and have that under our belt. Now, Michael, I hope it's okay that I kind of I'll ask you a few questions. A couple of things. I think the hottest topic right now, we were talking earlier, is, you know, Commissioner Lara, right? He just dropped the bomb last night, talking about, you know, I saw some, here's the thing. I'm trying to get Commissioner Lara on the podcast, okay? I've sent him a few invitations. I hit him again this morning. I actually saw him at the IBHS burn event that we had a few days ago, but did not get a chance to engage with him. But this news that just hit all of us, he's basically saying, you know, that this came down from the governor saying, hey, you need to do something about this, right? Can you kind of expand on your thoughts in unpacking what you think just happened here?
Yeah, I think it was kind of driven through inaction and what we saw from the carriers. The carriers were basically pulling out of California because they couldn't be profitable. They weren't able to get the rate increases they need to cover their reinsurance costs. So it was at the stalemate, and nothing was really being done other than the carriers leaving. So it is a good first step. It's definitely not the total solution that we're all hoping for, but at least we're seeing movement, right?
Yeah.
You know, where the carriers have ability to get rate kind of moving forward, and then also the ability to use forward-looking CAT models, which they haven't had that ability. You know, we see it time and time again, the CAT models that look backwards are not helping in this climate that we're in now.
Right.
It's just changing too rapidly.
Yeah.
So you need best data available. You need the best CAT models available to be able to accurately, you know, price and take care of this risk. But so that's a new first step. We'll see what the take up is. One of the things that stuck out for me on this was they were asking the carriers to write 85% of their business in wildfire prone areas.
Yeah, I saw that.
That's
yeah, what's your take on that?
So, you know, number one, is the carrier going to be willing to take that risk? Number two, and more importantly, is there capacity on the reinsurance side to take on that risk? They're already holding back as far as like releasing capacity, and because they're gun shy for California because of the losses we've had.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, kind of moving forward.
Yeah. And, you know, you and I were speaking earlier about this reinsurance and the fact that, you know, I'll just read it here right at LA Times. It says, under this new deal, insurers have agreed to return to those fire zone areas up to a certain threshold equivalent to 85% of their statewide market share. That means, for example, State Farm, which covers 21% of the state, would require to cover 18% of the houses in fire zones. Like, that's more riskier, man. That's like this deal, my friends. I don't know if it's really going to go through, and it says that it's going to apply in 2024, but I don't know, man. I'm not thrilled about the details on this, but to your point, Mike, it is a step in the right direction for sure, 100%. And what really stood out to me was it says Governor Newsom also issued an executive order on Thursday afternoon commanding the insurance commissioner to, quote, take prompt regulatory action to strengthen and stabilize California's marketplace, end quote. Like this finally, right? Finally, it's got the attention that it's been needing for years, and specifically the last few months when you see the exodus of some of these companies and the ability for the carrier to say, enough is enough, we've got to stop the bleeding, we will not be writing new policies in California until something changes. And to your point, this is a positive thing, and we have to look at it that way. From my standpoint, I still see a lot of regulatory hurdles that have to be jumped in order to really make this work. But let's hope for the best. That's what I got to say about that.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's, we'll take any small victory that we can get to help the insurance. And the past few years, we haven't seen them being protected. I know not raising the rates to the outside, that looks like you're protecting the clients, the customers, the homeowners. And the reality is, when the carriers leave and there's no solution other than the fair plan or the non-admitted space, which is a much higher entry point, you're not helping anybody. So I think this was definitely long overdue, and we'll see how this plays out.
Awesome. Well, let's hope for the best. I know. I think I saw a post I think Amy Bach was actually quoted in some of this here in the actual report that I saw, and I'm looking forward to having Amy on here pretty soon too on our podcast. I know she's been heavily involved in assisting in any way she possibly can to help the state figure some things out. So a lot of people have invested a lot of time, energy, and resources to kind of bring this together. I'm very grateful to everyone that has put that energy in to make some stuff happen. So let's hope for the best. Now, Mike, let's jump in, man. You and I have had multiple conversations, and your former employer is AIG, and you were the field manager there, and you were working in the mitigation space, right? In the wildfire prevention space. Can you share a little bit more about your experience there?
Yeah, our program that we had there was called the Wildfire Protection Unit. Our mission was twofold. Number one, to go out and assess the risk for the homeowners, provide them with mitigation solutions, provide that feedback to the underwriting team as well. And then, because we were all former firefighters, we could also respond during wildfire to prep and prepare those homes in front of the fire. So that was our approach for since 2011. That's pretty much what that program did.
Now, Mike, I think people. So, I think people will be asking, "Hey, Mike, in your position, you would go out to a home and then you would report this information to an underwriter, and the question is posed: what happens after that? How does the underwriting team make decisions on what property gets insured or not? Do you know how that process works?"
So the properties we were mainly looking at we had already insured. We were inspecting them on an annual basis just to make sure they had all the latest mitigation in place to best protect the homes. So nothing we really did affected whether, and this is kind of a misconception that oh, they're going to drop us depending on what the inspector finds. We were there solely to help the client, to provide those mitigation solutions. And that changed over time. After the Woolsey fire, we learned a lot more about, the effects of bark mulch and juniper and cypress and how they can impact homes. So, the requirements, and we're seeing this across the insurance space now, that 0 to 5 foot zone being a critical area, that's changed. It's been widely adopted where 2015 when I first started, nobody was, really enforcing that or really looking at that from the insurance side. So I think that's a positive step that's kind of come out of these fires. We learn from our losses, unfortunately, and the insurance companies especially, and we're now using the latest science. And you attended, you helped out with the IBHS test recently, and those are the type of tests that could be shown in the public that really shows what actually happens on a wildfire. And it's important for the public to see that.
Absolutely. Okay, so when you would do these annual inspections, they weren't necessarily to identify whether someone's going to get insured. They were already uninsured of AIG. You would just go out and just kind of report, hey, here's the status. And you specifically, you would speak to the homeowners or a principal there who's in charge and educate them on what they can do to mitigate their risk. Was it specific to wildfire, or is it in general risk?
So our team was specific to wildfire.
Okay.
Generally that's all we're looking at from the wildfire space. And I learned early on, and it was super empowering to explain these risks to the homeowner, and you could literally see the light bulb go off in their head, which I didn't think was possible. But when you are able to really tell them what the actual risk is, instead of them maybe just getting directions from underwriter, hey, you have to do X, Y, Z, I think it really made impact on whether they complied or not and what they wanted to do to improve the risk. And then it generates more questions as well. They'll be more engaged in asking questions. So that was the fun part of the job for sure.
Yeah. Mike, can you give us an example of some of the things that homeowners, the conversations you were having with them on how they can protect their home against wildfire?
So, we started looking at the home and working out, the 0 to 5 foot space. We focused in on the home itself, the gutters, make sure the gutters were clean and pine needle, leak debris, anywhere where ember could land in there and ignite it and get underneath the roof. There's a misconception that, I have a metal roof, it'll be fine, but it's generally getting underneath the roof and in there and smoldering and getting that ignited. So looking at those, recommending gutter guards to mitigate that risk as well. And we you're into that space as well for both water and fire loss. That's how we would pitch it as well. Not only you're protecting against fire, you're also protecting against potential water loss for clogged gutters and downspouts. So those, looking at that, kind of working our way out. I mentioned bark mulch earlier. In California, it's prevalent, and everybody would have it, especially in the drought era that we were in, and right up against the home, under the vegetation, and even on stucco homes, it would get behind the weep screens and go climb up into the wall. So having that pulled away from the home, working out, we talked about juniper and cypress, and really got into all the flammable, vegetation. And, the thing I would always reference is if it's fragrant, it's flammable. Anything that has that fragrancy, it's got the oils, it's got the resins, and
I like that.
Obviously roses, not so much, but everything else.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I never even thought about that. I like that. Okay. Now, let me ask you, Mike, in the years that you've been consulting homeowners in best practices, like what's the feedback? I know you mentioned that, the light bulb goes on, but what's the feedback and what are people actually doing about the information that you've provided?
So it's interesting. We've seen a shift where people, they would say, okay, we'll do this. And then we come back year and year and not really doing much.
Oh, really? Okay.
as we saw more fires, people would start getting more engaged. They were kind of getting the picture of what was happening. But you would still run into people that would just say, "Oh, I'm going to depend on the fire department." And I really don't want to do anything for my risk. That's what I paid them for. And they said, my fire station's 1 mile away. We'd always let them know, I'm like, there's no guarantee that fire department's going to show up. There's no guarantee on a large scale fire that even a local fire department's going to come up. It could be out of county, it could be out of state. That station has one engine. There's 25 homes on your street. So, just trying to, it's a continual process to coach. I mean, you would take any angle you could, right? Any way you can get in there and really talk about the risk, and it's a learning process. Like we would get trained up on other areas as well, just to find the angle to get in to let them know what the risk is and be able to provide a solution for them. And it was different for every person, for sure.
Yeah. And I've said this in the past, that I really truly believe that because the carriers began to request that some of these practices begin to get executed, like the vents, ember-resistant vents, the gutter guards, vegetation management, 0 to 5 is now becoming super popular and absolutely critical. Then they're also adding enclosed eaves. I love the fact that the carrier, because they've been seen as a bad guy, right? They're enforcing this or saying you need to do this, otherwise I'm not going to renew you. I think is a really good thing. I think the carriers alone not only have helped themselves with preventing catastrophic loss, but have saved some people's lives, in enforcing this, and save homes. And what really shocks me, I shouldn't say that, shock is a strong word, but what surprises me is a lot of people, when they decide not to do some of these things, in a lot of what we're talking about is, most of this is do it yourself, that people can do on a weekend. But by not doing it, they think it's not that important. But I challenge people in that thinking, because I've been on the other side. You too, Mike, have seen the catastrophic events that take place and the impact on a home, the impact on a family. And I'm dealing with the home is either burnt down or partially burnt. There's chaos within the family. And these things are not talked about often, but the internal relationships of that family, I can see that the stress in the personal relationships really begin to get much more difficult between the spouses, between the family, between the relatives. And no one talks about these things, but if you're going to experience a wildfire, and you have some partial damage, you're in this repair process for a minimum of a year, maybe longer, depending on the impact that it has on your building and your property. But the emotional roller coaster, the stress, the time that it takes away from life, like by having a fire and impact on your home, you just signed up for an ugly roller coaster that may not pay out like you think it's going to, because there's so many limitations now on our policies. And if we're not paying attention, we're going to get stuck with the short end of the stick. In addition to the emotional roller coaster, we're going to get a fat bill that only we have to pay, right?
Yeah, that's a great point, OP, and that's not really talked about, is the claims process and what people have to go through. I've gone through it on the water loss side, so I know how that's affected, and I've seen it on the wildfire side, and a long, drawn-out process to go through that, and the additional stress that those go through. And the other, it is a great point. Insurance kind of led the way as far as making these requirements. Yes. And trying to keep people. And I've talked to a couple municipal fire inspectors, and they're not allowed to enforce a code on the property itself, but they would reference the insurance. Say, you know what? It's like, I can't enforce you to remove this, juniper bush, but your insurance company may. So they're leveraging the insurance companies to empower people to protect their homes. So I think it's very smart. It's going to take pretty much everybody to get this done and protect the people from having those catastrophic losses and having to go through that stress. There's plenty of homes in Malibu that still haven't been rebuilt from the Woolsey fire,
Oh,
and
it's so
it's,
true.
it's amazing. Yeah. So
Incredible. And it's interesting because the firefighters, the fire chiefs, the fire marshals, whoever's having the conversations with these homeowners on making the recommendations, having spoken and now been with Rich Snyder for a few years, he shares the frustration of giving the advice, but you can't cross the line and tell them they really need to do it. It's just a recommendation. And he said it's so frustrating because there's nothing more they could do besides that. They can't enforce it. And so to hear a firefighter like engage the insurance carrier in the conversation, like the firefighters really care. They care so much that they're going to say, Mrs. Smith, here's what I suggest. I can't make you do it, but the carrier, he might make you do it. And the reality is they're just trying to save homes. They're just trying to help people. They're trying to save lives. I mean, if there's anything I learned from being exposed to now 12, 13 firefighters that work with us, these gentlemen and ladies have a massive heart to serve. And that surprised me. I always thought that the firefighters are just buff dudes that work out all the time when they're not doing stuff, right? But these people, they have a heart for service, and it really transcends through. So the fact that the insurance carriers are allowing that ability for people to jump in and say, hey, let's use the carrier as kind of a hammer, I think is whatever it takes, in my opinion. Now, Mike, really quick, can we talk a little bit about your previous experience before insurance?
Sure.
Okay.
So I got my start in wildfire in 2010. I worked for Jefferson County Sheriff's Office in Colorado on the emergency management crew. We had a fuels crew, fire mitigation. Our daily job is going out doing creating shaded fuel breaks, defensible space for both on private and public land. We were grant funded. It was a really small group, but we did a lot of good work. We ran masticators through Gamble Oak, clearing out around homes. Did a lot of tree falling. I went from never falling a tree to dropping a ton of trees. So
really,
it definitely changed the experience, and I do miss that part for sure. So it was a lot of fun. But we also responded to fires within the county, and then we were also be able to be tasked out on a state engine and fight fires throughout the state, and then also the Western U.S. So I did that from 2010 to 2015 before I got picked up by AIG.
Got it. And then with when you did transferring into AIG, did AIG already have their response team? Because you actually would go out when there's an incident on behalf of AIG, right? And you would be in the trucks, and you guys, like, they have their own firefighting team. Do they still have that, or no?
No.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
that program has transitioned out with the company.
Got it. So, but when you were involved and they were engaged in that response, can you give us some stories of what that was about? I think specifically, I would love people to hear when there's an incident. Does the fire department or the fire chief or the person in charge, the incident commander, do they just allow anyone to come on in and go in past the incident, or how does that work?
No. So, and this is kind of across the board with the insurance agencies and the contract engines that they bring in. They're required to check in with the incident commander, let them know what engines they have available, the people on the engine, the qualifications of them, give them a list of homes they need to go see, just to prepare. And, sometimes they're let in, sometimes they're not. It just depends on who you're engaging with, the level of fire activity. Things have improved, I would say, since 2017 and 2018. They're kind of taking any resource they can as additional resources. And they were familiar, especially with our program, seeing our trucks all the time and the level of professionalism that we were able to provide. So they kind of expected that. So that's what's being done right now across the insurance world. I don't know any major carrier that isn't in the response side as well. But we always preach that the inspection part was far more important than the fire response. A lot of times people, they depend on the fire response, and we would always let them know what you do before the fire has a much bigger impact than some fire truck or crew showing up to your house during a fire and trying to save it,
Now,
after the fact.
Mike, that sounds like, kind of holistic and kind of a great approach and a great thought process. But, having a fire truck in front of your home feels like I'm protected, right? And so, I think if people have this sense of, oh no, I'm going to have a fire truck in my neighborhood or in front of my house because I have AIG or Chubb or Pure or you name it on these carriers, I think that's a false sense of security that they have. But why would you say, and I want to challenge you on this, and I believe it too, but why would you say that prevention is far greater of a result in having, no or less fire damage to your home than having depending on a response?
So, and what we found out on these, fast moving wildfires, there's no guarantee that anybody's going to show up to your property. There's just not enough fire trucks. There's not enough, even on the, insurance side, there's no guarantee that anybody's going to be able, number one, get to your house at all or get to your house in time, especially with the fast moving wildfires. So our goal was to get that home prepared enough to stand on its own, have that 0 to 5 area cleared, have their defensible space, have them resistant vents if they needed it, truly needed it. So that way, if nobody shows up, it has a much higher chance of making it. Number two, that also makes it more attractive for firefighters to defend, not just a private resource, but any engine crew going down the street. They triage as they go down the street. They're looking at, we can defend that home, that one we can't defend. So you want to make it as attractive to a fire crew as possible. Have a big open driveway, have all the stuff to kind of taken care of where firefighters can make a stand if they choose to. But I want to tag on to something that you had brought up on another podcast, I think it was with Alex Rosenfeld. Not only does that make it more attractive to the fire crews, but it also makes it more attractive to carriers. Yeah. As these people are trying to get insurance with so little capacity, you need to sell your home. And if you already have these mitigation measures in place, that's a better selling point for the broker. It makes the broker's job a lot easier. So, it's yeah.
No, go ahead, Mike.
So the fire response side, that's the sexy part, right? You go in and you're going to save a home, but man, it takes a lot of timing and a lot of luck to be in the right place, the right time to actually save a home as fire is coming up on it. Yeah. And if it's not mitigated around, nobody's going to take that chance. They're not going to put their crew in harm's way to defend a home where it's in a bad spot. So it's all about the mitigation up front.
I'm just thinking about this one customer who called us. We did an assessment. He lives in a very high-end area in Beverly Hills, and they have 2 homes. And I think to do the vents and the gutter guards and vegetation management was probably going to be, I don't know, $50,000 because these estates are so large. But all he was interested in was response. And he says, hey, that's cool. Thank you for that. Hey, how much to guarantee that a company shows up here and they're going to respond to our house if it catches fire, or if there's an event nearby. And we referred them to a company who can take care of that. That turned out to be, I think, $30,000 a day, something like that, to show up to their home and sit there for 24 hours. And this gentleman was like, well, hold on, that seems like a lot of money, And I'm like, look, talk to the vendor. I don't know how all that works, right? I'm not gonna be responsible. And by the way, there's no guarantee they can get in past the evacuation zone. There's no guarantee that someone's going to show up, even if you do sign their contract, because they might be tied up somewhere else. Like, there's so many unknowns. And I couldn't understand how this gentleman, with the massive amounts of real estate and assets they have, why would you risk your home that way and just be focused on the response? And so it's so interesting the way people's minds work. But, in that case, I'm not sure what took place. We just referred them to the vendor, and I'm not sure what took place. But it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to, and we see this on the agency side, mitigation dollars versus suppression dollars. And how do you balance that? For the longest time, they would take from the mitigation dollars to pay for suppression that wasn't budgeted for mitigation. When we know, these forests that have been, mismanaged for years and years and years with the fuel buildup, they need to be managed, and you can't keep taking from the mitigation dollars. So it kind of lines up on the private side as well. Yeah, you may pay a little bit more up front, but your home's going to be in a much better shape than depending on one fire crew. And by the way, on a state that large, you would probably need multiple engines, not just one. That's not going to get it done. One engine with a crew too. Yeah. Because I know the size of those estates you're talking about.
They're
it's
massive. Yeah. It's acres and acres. Like, yeah. It's really interesting. When you say, I think this is interesting what you said about the mitigation dollars and suppression dollars. Are you saying that in the insurance world, there's a certain amount of money budgeted for suppression and a certain amount budgeted for mitigation or for prevention?
No, that's more on basically on the agency side. So Forest Service.
Okay. I see what you're saying. I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. Okay. Because I was going to add that Rich Snyder has also shared that, where there's, in the fire department, there's a prevention side and there's a suppression side, and the suppression side was heavily funded. The prevention side was like a stepchild, and there wasn't enough money to hire more people to engage in that kind of work. I think things are changing now, but for years that has been the process and how the money flows. And so it's a surprise that it's taken this long, but when you think back, you really start to understand, oh, shoot, just because it's a fire department or just because they're firefighters or fire chiefs or engine bosses, it doesn't mean they understand prevention. And that's right. Really like the dots that I needed to connect. Like, what do you mean they don't understand prevention? Because they're not being funded to be taught that. They're training, they're focusing on how to, put out the fire, and that's where their focus is. And so that was a big aha moment for me. But it sounds like you experienced that in your firefighting days.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you'd see that year after year. I mean, the money that went into prevention was on the small side. Like I said, when I was with the county, the mitigation we were doing was all grant funded. It wasn't budgeted money to do this for management for fuels treatments. So we would get it where we could. I mean, that's slowly, like you said, slowly starting to change, where prevention's taking a step up, which it definitely needs to do. It's been shown before, prevention definitely outweighs the suppression, because it's, like you said, to save a home, especially on a fast moving wildfire, extremely difficult to do, and especially if the mitigation isn't in place.
Got it. Now, Mike, you and I have talked in the past few weeks. AIG has made some significant decisions to lay off a certain sector of their team, and move into a different direction. I know you're limited on what you could share, but can you share what you can share about what took place and how that moved? What that kind of insurance company was thinking and what they're doing?
I really can't comment on what they were thinking. I really, that's at this point in time, to move in that direction seems kind of counterintuitive to me. Um, you know, I think a lot of insurance companies want to look for a simple solution, not to say IG, but a lot of them, they think they can model their way out of the problem, right? They think if we don't have homes in this very high fire areas, that will be fine. But as we've seen in the Marshall Fire in Colorado, and recently the Lahaina Fire, that's just not true. These are low to moderate areas and taking significant losses. And that's a fact, like I said, it's across the board, all carriers. They don't want to ride in those areas. That's fine. But we lose homes all the time in these low to moderate areas. And number one, because they're not prepared. They haven't seen fire in the past. They're not properly prepared for fire. And a lot of those areas, you look at some of these models, and some of these CAT models will highly rate the frequency of fires over severity. It's kind of treated like, hurricanes or water losses. Frequency is bad, but in wildfire, frequency isn't that bad. It's the severity that takes down homes, right? You look at the Woolsey fire, that area hadn't burned, the majority of that area hadn't burned in 38 years. People think Malibu burns all the time, but those areas that haven't burned in 30, 40, 50 plus years, that's where you get the severe fires. That's where you get the homes that are burned, especially in California. Then you get outside California where you don't have building codes, where you don't have defensible space codes. A grass fire, which was basically Lahaina and Marshall Fire, can take down thousands of homes. And because the grass goes right up to wood fences, connected to wood side of the homes, and once it gets structure, there's nothing you can really do about it. So there's a lot kind of coming down the line. You think about all the Western states, California, insurers and reinsurers are scared of California when in reality is the best prepared state for wildfire. From building codes to defensible space codes to the fire suppression teams that they have in place, the amount of aircraft, dozers, and the experience, the experience of these firefighters in California. California, yes, they lose a lot of homes, but look at the number of homes here. It's just a higher number, and it's a giant state. So when we have fires, you see it. But you have to look at the other areas. You have to look at the victories. So when I mentioned the Woolsey fire, 10% of the homes, that is not a lot in a 100,000 acre fire. Where you look at Marshall fire was a 6,000 acre fire, and they lost 1,600 homes. So California will do better. Will they still lose homes? Yes. But as we progress, and California is progressing, I was at the California Wildfire Resiliency Task Force meeting in Calabasas, and the amount of dollars being budgeted for forest management, for data collection, for home hardening, the grants being made, they're taking the right steps, and we're decades in front of these other states. But these other states, the wildfire risk keeps going up and up and up, and until something gets done there, that's where the big risk is in other states, not just California.
Man, Mike, you said a lot right there. I like that. Okay, so very true. We have the most experienced firefighters here in California. We have the best codes in California, like in the United States. We're the leaders of the code. And to your point, you and I have spoken about this in the past. If there is an incident and you have a wildfire come through your area, next year, the vegetation that's just been burned off of there is not mature enough to cause a significant wildfire again. And I think that's what you and I talked about, like, man, why aren't the carriers paying attention to that? Like the chances that you got some areas that 30 years, not 40, 50 years, nothing's ever burned. That's high risk. Other areas where, hey, this burned a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the risk there is low. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it comes down to these long range models. That, they may be looking 1 in 100 years. So, a 15-year span or 20-year span right after a fire where it's good, they may not be looking at it. They may be looking further down the road. But as firefighters, it seems completely counterintuitive. When we saw after recent fires, like, well, we're not going to write there anymore. And as firefighters, we're like, that's the perfect area to write. They're not going to have it a long time, and we see that kind of time and time again. And until you actually start lining up what the risk is, and for California, these areas, some of them have burned so frequent that it's type converted from brush to grass, and we don't typically lose homes in grass fires in California because the building codes, because it's defensible space. So you look at an area like Santa Clarita, Simi Valley, Calabasas, where they've had a ton of fire. That always models super high, but we don't ever lose homes there. Not on the scale that we lose in these other areas, like in Northern California, areas that hadn't burned in 50, 60 years, right? So that's where we see the losses. Also for Southern California are a lot of newer construction. And the newer construction built after 2008 WUI codes, they have a much higher rate of survival. There was a study by the National Bureau of Economic Research that said, a home that was built after 2008 is 40% less likely to burn than a home that was built to standards in 1990. And 40%. And we saw that in the Camp Fire. You think about the number of homes burned in Camp Fire, but the ones that survived, there was a higher number that survived that were built after 2008. So it shows that the codes do matter.
Man, and you know what's interesting is that I was at a conference and there was a gentleman, I think he was from Washington, and Rich and I were speaking with him, and he just was asking about some of the codes that we have, and it sounded like such an odd situation that we were talking about, 7A compliance and all these things, and he says we have none of that. And so I think, again, California is leading the way, and I think other states, and it's interesting you're saying this because I'm more afraid of other states now after talking with you, because it's so true that they're behind the times, and a grass fire that we say, hey, we're going to poo-poo that. That's no big deal. We're going to handle it because we have the code and we have the manpower. In other states, they don't have the code, right? So that grass fire is going to be destructive, and they don't have the manpower like no one does when you have a fast-moving fire. Yeah, so I'm more concerned now about the neighboring states, probably more than ever now. So thank you for freaking me out.
No worries. There's hope. You see this as a lot of these what they call home rule states, right, where you can't really enforce the building codes. It's down to the local jurisdiction. It's not state governed for these building codes, and that makes it awfully difficult. Colorado is starting to look at changing that. They're just now trying to put a committee together to start generating building codes to recommend. Whether it gets passed or not, it's going to be difficult to see. One of the star models right now is Austin City. What Justice Jones has done there, getting WUI building codes within Austin City limits. And it's pretty novel. It's one of the few home rule areas that they were able to pass building codes. And, he's somebody that you should probably have on your podcast to share his.
And that's in Austin, you said?
Austin, Texas, yeah.
And what's his name again?
Austin City. Justice Jones.
I will definitely look into that. I think that's anyone who's able to be a champion on leading the charge for some of these things, 100%. Like, it did not come easy, and they had to have jumped over many, many hurdles to get the message across. So I appreciate that. I think it's great.
Yeah, they present at the WUI conference in Reno this past spring, and that's they shared their story there, and it was definitely a difficult challenge, but I think it could be a model for other states for sure.
And look, Texas is a state where we went out to go help out when they had these pipes that were frozen a few years back, and there was just water damage everywhere. They don't have You don't have to be a licensed contractor to build a house over there. That was the scariest thing that I found out. And when we started to see these plumbing connections that failed, it was scary. It was scary on the work that we saw. We saw PVC pipes attached to copper, attached to galvanized pipe, and it had been working for years until the freeze happened, and then drywall comes down, and we see this Mickey Mouse thing going on. And so for Justice Jones to be able to get through Texas and Austin to put something together for the WUI, I think is very significant, because the whole state seems to me like it's the Wild West, but that's, my perception coming from California, where there's so many rules that we have to be careful, what we're doing, why we're doing it, et cetera. And there's more governance around here than in other states. Now, Mike, as we finish up here, man, and I appreciate you jumping on with me really quick. What's next for you? Like, you have massive opportunities the way I see it. I think, you have the experience of working on the carrier side, on the prevention. You're an educator. I've seen some of your webinars. I've seen some of your videos. Like, what you're doing, prevention. And on top of that, you've worked in the fire service. You've got opportunities. Like, what's going through your mind? What are you thinking? What's the future for Mr. Michael Thayer? If you could share.
Yeah, no, I appreciate all the kind words. Definitely, that definitely helps. I'm not too sure right now. I do have the experience on both sides of it, but at the end of the day, wildfire is still a niche area. And especially within the insurance world, our team was pretty unique. And there's obviously a lot of talent within that team that's out, looking for similar jobs as well. But to see what's out there, for me, I would like to be able to, reach a broader audience as far as providing mitigation solutions. We're pretty limited with just the high net worth clients. I like to hit it more on the community side, and whether that means getting it with the agency in risk reduction, community risk reduction, something like that would be pretty ideal for me to reach a wide audience and be able to educate on a broad scale.
I love that. What I really like about what you're saying, Mike, is that, some people will jump into a job or a position because, we need the revenue, we need the income. It's just part of life, right? But to hear you say that, you have these values that are guiding you as to what really you want to do. You want to make more impact. You want to get wider on your footprint. You want to help out communities versus just this, the high net worth clients. I think that's powerful. And I'm gonna connect you. I'm thinking about some fire safe councils. Like, not all of them get good funding, but some of them do. And part of what they're getting funding for is to spread the message, and that's meeting with, having these town hall meetings, whether it's on Zoom or whether it's, in person, making a bigger impact. I'll also introduce you to some people that are working with the state. I honestly, Mike, I think you probably have that kind of pedigree that you could actually be working with the state in helping put together some of these new ideas and practices to implement. So if it's okay, I'm going to send you a few names, and then you can kind of decide, if that's something that you want to look into or not.
I definitely appreciate the support. I'm kind of keeping my options open and seeing what's out there where I can have a big impact. And, I go back to what we were talking about at the beginning about the public needs to know more, right? I mean, your podcast is a great platform. let's grow this where the public can see it, because a lot of times it's just our fire people talking to fire people, and we agree with each other, right?
Yeah.
But to be able to let the public know, I think about, you know, I watch the news every morning, and they have these "Be Water Wise" commercials like every 5 minutes, right? Why can't we do PSAs for wildfire? Like home hardening tips that could be on the news or a commercial. You see the freeway signs that said limit your watering when we're in a drought. I'm like, why can't we do wildfire tips on that? It's hitting that broader message, because we're not going to do this alone. You can't legislate wildfire protection. You can't, on the insurance side, promote it and be able, just drop people if they don't do it. We need to really educate them until they're able to learn on a meaningful basis. We're just not going to reach enough people, and we're not going to protect enough people.
Boom. I love that. I think, hitting people with consequences if they don't do the work, like that's the stick, right? And that's kind of what's happening. And I can tell you, and I know you have stories, people hate that. People hate to know that they're going to be punished for not doing some of the things. But if the message is spread out enough in many different ways, people will realize that this is the best thing for their families, or one of the best things they can do to minimize their risk. And from a capacity to be able to help their family, relieve any stress that could come in the future from doing some of these things. So I think you're right. I think having this carrot now of saying, hey, you can win in many different ways. It's not just the stick that's hitting us in the behind that's saying you better do this work. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I love it. Mike, is there anything that you want to share before we close here with our audience? And you're right. I think, a lot of our listeners are their own champions in their own neighborhoods, and saying, hey, we need to really prepare. But it's preaching to the choir, it feels like sometimes, right? And so getting more different people in, more of a variety, to be able to spread the word is going to be important. But is there anything that you want to share, that maybe some closing comments?
No, I mean, like I said, it's getting everybody involved. We're all in this together. Like Dr. Ian Cope says, we're not powerless. We can definitely solve this problem, and it's making that known, and not just to the public side, but we talked about before, the reinsurance side. They have to look at, from my standpoint, I think they need to involve more realistic type models. We can't rely on this old system, and it's going to take diving down to property level details, like Frank Prevost was talking about with Nancy Watkins, the project they work on. And there's a lot of work to be done there. It's, come up with what are those mitigation standards, and how do we implement and measure them, and how they can be incorporated in the models on a meaningful basis. And that's going to take some time. But it definitely needs to be done on the reinsurance side, because that's the other part of the issue. We have the reinsurance pulling from one side, the commissioners pulling from another, and the carriers are caught in the middle. But at the end of the day, all of it hurts, the homeowners, especially in California. So there's a lot of work to be done there, and get the reinsurance teams up to speed, because we see time and time again that there are success stories, right? The news
Absolutely.
always focuses in on how many acres are burned and the number of homes lost. You never hear the story of how many homes survived, and I'd like to see that change, because that's the story I'm interested in. How many homes survived, and how did they survive? Because that, for me, is a more powerful story. And that, if you start sharing that story, hey, all these homes survived, and this is why, I think you would have more buy-in for sure.
Boom. I love that. I just imagine a community on a hillside with 50 homes or so, and they've all done the work. They've been together to do this together, and wildfire comes through, impacts other neighborhoods, but this neighborhood is not damaged. Like that to me, you're right. Like that would be so beautiful to see and go, wow, like that is the miracle community. And when you peel back the miracle, it is the basic fundamental things that they did to prevent damage to their community. I love that. Look, I hope that we both live to see that happen, where you really see a community just make it through and have some positive impact. I love that.
Well, we've already seen it happen. There's plenty of examples like that. The one off the top of my head is the Oaks of Calabasas, that neighborhood up on the knob there. Not one home went down in the Woolsey fire.
So true. True.
That comes down to it's surrounded by grass, plenty of defensible space, and new building codes. And not one home was lost in there. You go back to the Dos.
But was that because of Kanye West? Was that because of Kanye? I'm just kidding.
No,
I'm just messing with you.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, it does exist. Dos Vientos neighborhood out in Newberry Park. So the Hill fire burned through there, but previous to that, the Springs fire back in 2013, I believe. Because of what they've done in there, the home hardening already, WUI standards, the defensible space they had around there. I watched that fire when I was in Colorado, and it was wind-driven fire, ripping through grass. They got the dozers in, widened the defensible space, and used helicopters and just herded the thing around the neighborhood into the ocean. Wow. And I'm thinking, we're in Colorado, we're losing a lot of those homes.
Yeah.
But it can be done, but they don't. That's never shared, right? They want to focus on the number of acres burned and the number of homes burned.
I'm going to have to get with you, in the future to really discuss some of those neighborhoods, because I really would love to see that. That's impressive to me, and we need more positivity. Right. To your point, of what survived and why, and really start to emphasize that homes. And it, and I know homes can survive. People just have to do what's necessary to make that investment to make it happen. So,
sure, and it also goes back to the point I was mentioned before: the frequency versus severity, right? And those are two examples where they see frequent fire, but they don't have any losses. So it's about how these models are used, right? I mean, for me, models need to be utilized and not weaponized. And we've seen this trend in the past few years of just being weaponized, used to increase pricing to get off of risk, when in truth, the models may not line up and with what's actually happening on the ground. And so that's a big shift that has to change as well.
A lot of the dots need to be connected to make this all work. And Mike, look, thank you for being part of that community of making those things happen. And brother, thank you so much for jumping on with me. And I'm going to make some introductions. And for those of you listening, if you have anything that you think Mike would be interested in, what a great caliber of character this person has. So feel free to get the message out. I hope that's okay, Mike, that I said that. I mean, I don't look. You're going to have a bunch of opportunities. You're going to decide what you want to do. You're going to land somewhere, and we're going to continue to be friends. So I love wherever the future is going to take you. And thank you for sharing your words of wisdom with us.
No, I appreciate the time and the kind words. You know me, OP. I can talk wildfire all day with you. So it was fun.
I love it. All right, Mike. Thank you so much, brother. Take care.
That's all for this episode of All Things Wildfire. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to our show and follow us on social media to stay up to date on all things wildfire. And as always, thanks for listening.